Hello, welcome to the interview here on France 24. Well, as China prepares to unveil a new generation of leaders at this week's 18th Communist Party Congress, many outsiders are writing off the entire spectacle. They say it's just a carefully scripted charade, masquerading as an expression of popular will. Now, the closed-door process of selecting China's leaders does fly in the face of what many of us here in the West have been taught about democracy. But my guest today, Martin Jakes, he's a British academic and also a newspaper columnist and author of a global best-selling book on the rise of China called When China Rules the World. He says Chinese tend to see things very differently. He says a Chinese state actually enjoys greater legitimacy in the eyes of its people than many ostensibly democratic Western governments. Martin Jakes, many thanks for joining me today from London.
My pleasure.
I'd like to cut right to the chase here. A lot of people see the lineup of the Chinese leaders on that podium at the National Congress. They say it is a textbook study in rubber stamp politics. All these delegates basically just rubber stamping what these a bunch of elderly elites have already decided behind closed doors. That would seem to be the absolute definition of anti-democratic government.
Well, I understand that reaction because it's so unfamiliar to a Western audience. But you've got to remember that the Congress is, if you like, the summation of a much, much longer process which has been going on for many, many months. I mean, the Communist Party is a huge organization and the delegates are elected, you know, during the process of the preparation. And there's been a great deal of argument and debate and discussion in the process. I mean, one's only got to recall the Bo Xilai scandal, which was not just about his crimes, but also about major policy issues, to see that you know, what we're seeing now is, as it were, the final presentation, the launch of the product, if you like, as a result of all these discussions.
The launch of the product, if you like, but when you talk about these discussion or negotiations, it is it not, really just a bunch of mandarins really discussing among themselves? Where do the delegates, these thousands of delegates, really come into the process?
Well, I mean, the actual Congress, of course, only a few people can speak. It's only lasts a week. And so it's really the presentation by the new leaders of the direction of China in various avenues over the next period. The discussion has been taking place over a long period. I mean, no one should have the idea that, you know, there's just a few leaders that decide the future of China. Look, this is a country of 1.3 billion people. It's been changing at the speed of light for the last 30 years. This has thrown up enormous problems, enormous questions that the Chinese leadership has had to deal with. This is the result. The whole transformation of China is the result of a huge creativity and energy and commitment by hundreds of millions of people. That's how China has changed, and the leadership has presided over the process, but not in a way which simply excludes everyone. It would be impossible to have unleashed the energies of the people in that kind of way.
We call this the Communist Party Congress, but there are some critics who would say that really it's communist these days in name only, that there's no communism, no socialism, no real ideology. All you really have here is naked power.
Well, I agree. I think that what you say has some truth until the last remark. I mean, it's true that this is, in many ways, the Chinese Communist Party is unrecognizable as a communist party if you measure it by the Soviet era and the Soviet tradition. But the Chinese Communist Party is an extremely different beast. I mean, it's a bit like taking all the parties in the world that call themselves national or call themselves democratic, this party or that party, and think, or Christian or whatever it is, and think they're all the same. They're not all the same.
But they're not all the same. But Martin Jakes, my question being, a lot of people would just say, this is a capitalist system now masquerading as a communist party. It's really, they're only surviving by dint of the fact that they've allowed capitalism to flourish.
Clearly what happened with Deng Xiaoping was an acceptance that, you know, centralized planning wasn't working in the way that could realize China's possibilities. And, you know, in embracing the market and a growing private sector, there's no question, that, in my view, that China is becoming progressively more capitalist. But it also has, and I agree with this, strongly Chinese characteristics, one of which is that the state is omnipresent, ubiquitous in Chinese society in a way that is very unfamiliar to ourselves in the West. So, you know, I don't think that, I mean, this is a genuinely new experiment. You know, it's not simply copying the West, it's not simply imitating the West, it's not doing what China did before, but it is drawing on certain Chinese traditions, if you like.
You said the party is ubiquitous, and we actually heard earlier this week that one of the Chinese cosmonauts is setting up a party cell, a communist party cell on the International Space Station. But I'm just curious, I want to ask you about the paranoia we keep hearing about. Why is the party taking such draconian measures, security measures around this Congress? They seem to be on the defensive.
Well, I think that this has always been a very strongly Chinese tradition. And I think we've got to understand the way in which the state views its role. And it was not just in the communist period, it was also in the imperial period. I mean, you know, let's remember, this is a country of 1.3 billion people. That is the population of the whole of Europe and the United States and Japan and Russia combined. It's an extraordinary phenomenon that in the year 2012, we have a country of this size and this scale, which basically, with lots of twists and turns, has stayed together for 2,000 years. And the Chinese state, running a country like this, you know, running France, to be quite blunt about it, is a doddle compared with running China or running Britain or running the United States. That's easy. This is on a totally different scale.
But when you
and to keep this country together, with all the centrifugal force that is inevitably involved and with such scale and such diversity, is extremely difficult. So the state, and it's true of the imperial era, of the Confucian era, as well as this era, the state has always regarded as part of good governance, you know, being very, very alert to problems that might you know, send it off the rails. And so I think you have to view the way the Chinese think about these things and approach them with this in your mind.
One of the problems, perhaps, that could send it off the rails is we've heard a lot about the political discontent, especially among the growing middle class in China. How much of a threat do you think that poses to the one-party grip on power?
Well, I don't know what you're really saying when you say growing political discontent. Well, you have I don't know how you measure it.
A rising class of more affluent Chinese who have been protesting more for better living standards, environmental concerns. They want to live in a cleaner, better society.
Well, I mean, that's not exactly a new phenomenon. I mean, you know, you can't have a society on this scale changing at this speed without all kinds of expressions of desires and demands and aspirations and so on. If you've got a society, we're not talking about the West now, which is stuck in stasis and stagnation. We're talking about a society which is changing at extraordinary speed. That is constantly throwing up new possibilities, new aspirations, new opportunities. This is not a dead society presided over by a great bureaucracy. This is living, changing society in a way that the West has not seen ever, actually, but certainly not in the post-war period. I think the picture you're presenting, which is, well, you know, there's rising discontent and so on with the regime, I don't think that's true. I think this is an illusion.
Let me ask you, surely you wouldn't dispute the fact the outgoing Prime Minister, Wen Jiabao, has spoken of the need for political reform. Many people say political reform will be key. Tell us a little bit about, briefly, Xi Jinping, the next presumed leader. Is he going to be up to the task of these political reforms? Will he reform?
Well, he will certainly reform. I mean, you know, the whole process since the reform period began in 1978 has been a process of reform. You don't think you can get to this point without immense reforms going on. It's been, if you like, a process of permanent reform. That's one of the key reasons why China's got to where it has now. So Xi Jinping will be confronted with the same dynamic process of reform as his predecessors. But of course, Xi Jinping is coming into power where in a very different China to the one 10 years ago when Hu Jintao was in power. I mean, he's going to be confronted with a much bigger economy. Living standards are now at least 1.5, pushing twice as high as they were then. Lots of people, many more people living in the cities than was the case previously.
Martin Jakes, I'm sorry, we are running out of time. Very briefly, I just want to ask you, before we go, do you see it as a very far-off prospect that China could experience an upheaval, even something in a revolution, if things don't change quickly enough in the years ahead?
I don't envisage. I mean, let's take the next 10 years. I doubt it. I think it's very unlikely. Maybe beyond that, I mean, we're going to see some big political reforms in China and so on. But, you know, we should think of it in Chinese terms, not in Western terms. We seem to have a total failure of imagination in the West about China. We always think of it in our terms. We can't make sense of China like that. China is a product of a very different history and culture. And over the next 20 or 30 years, shall I tell you what the process is going to be?
Martin Jakes, I'd like you to. Unfortunately, we've run out of time. But I do take home your point, and I do appreciate you sharing your views today. Martin Jakes from London, author of the global bestseller, When China Rules the World. And we've been talking about China and its changes as it prepares to unveil a new generation of leaders. Thank you very much for watching the interview here on France 24.